recorded in there first. Yes, Rick.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening. My name is Jay Leonard, and on behalf of the Socratic Society, I'd like to welcome you all to the capstone of our fall lecture series. I encourage you to keep your eyes and ears open for events from our spring lecture series. The calendar should be ready sometime after winter break. Now, tonight, in keeping with the philosophical tradition, we shall remain after the lecture to discuss the argument that is presented to us. And I would invite you all to stick around and participate in that discussion. This evening, it is my privilege to introduce to you a man whose energetic style and willingness to examine thoroughly any position which is presented to him have allowed him in his lecture halls to achieve a degree of engagement with the students which I find exceedingly rare at the university level. And so I think that we are all lucky to have him here with us this evening. Please welcome to the lecture, Assistant Professor and Chair of the Philosophy and Humanities Department, Dr. Joseph Thompson.
Thank you all. It is really something to see this from here. So I'm going to ask you guys to indulge me for a moment, will you? I'm never going to see this again. One more.
Really?
I didn't quite get you. Well, I'd like to thank you guys for showing up, so many of you. This is really encouraging. And I'd really like to thank the Office of Instruction and Technology, Campus Technology Services, who are webcasting this. So we are going out to the world. There are some folks watching us from around the country, and apparently in Europe, and possibly even in Asia. So, hi all. And I would really like to thank our sponsors, the Socratic Society. This is the UAF Undergraduate Philosophy Organization. The officers of that organization have been instrumental in making this happen. I'd like to thank all of them, and especially President Jay Leonard. So, the morality of same-sex marriage. Well, why am I giving this talk? It seems to me that not only gays and lesbians should be speaking out about this issue, about same-sex marriage. Heterosexual people, both married and single, should also be concerned with this issue and should be supporting equality for gays and lesbians. Up until this point, I have held my convictions both privately and publicly about this matter, including in the classroom, and I have been upfront about that. In an ethics class, it seems to me it has been appropriate to address the issue. And I have, in the interest of full disclosure, let my students know upfront that I do not think that there is anything morally wrong with being gay or lesbian. And so I've said that over the years, but that has not felt like enough to me. Having thought about this issue for some years and believing it to be a very important one, I decided that it was time for me to speak out on this current debate in ethics in some way that was more explicit. So I'm trying to be a little bit more outspoken about this, and hence a talk like this. It hadn't originally been an idea of mine, but when I was approached by the Socratic Society, I said, well, I certainly have been thinking about this one issue, maybe we should talk about that. So, my interest here is in fairness, in equality, in civil rights, liberty and justice for all. I am interested in equal protection under the law. That is my agenda here. If heterosexuals are allowed to marry, then so too should gays and lesbians be allowed to. Now, I am not giving a speech at a political rally here. That is, this is a philosophical analysis, an argument. This is a lecture to the public from a moral philosopher. That is what I am. And what I want to do is to see us right a moral wrong. That is, there is a moral wrong, something which is morally wrong here. And it is not same-sex marriage. It is discrimination against same-sex marriage. So, I would like to address that issue and hopefully change people's consciousness about that. But there are some other things that have motivated me to give this talk. I would like to reassure some who may be doubtful about the matter, maybe who are young and unsure of themselves, or perhaps somebody who has a family member who is gay or lesbian and they may be conflicted about that. I want to reassure people, I think it needs to be stated and repeated, reiterated, that there's nothing wrong, morally or otherwise, with being gay or lesbian, that it is not a moral failing, that it is not a moral issue at all. There is nothing to feel guilty about. To get that across and for people to think in that way, it seems to me a change of consciousness is required. So since it is, in my analysis, a way of thinking that opposes same-sex marriage, then it is through another way of thinking that I want to try to get people to reconsider this issue. Now, I'll be using an abbreviation during this talk. I'll be talking about LGBT. That is, most of you know what this stands for. This is lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender. And I will use that phrase to refer to gay and lesbian issues because LGBT will often be a more appropriate or more inclusive expression than, let's say, talking about being gay or homosexuality. Sometimes it will stand for the same-sex relationship in same-sex marriage. But so I'll be generally sort of abbreviating and talking about LGBT in general here. My approach to the issue of same-sex marriage is from the standpoint of moral philosophy and of rights theory, what is sometimes called meta-ethics, that is, theories of how we justify our moral claims or ethical claims. And I submit my thesis in brief, right from the start, is that the only reason to oppose same-sex marriage would be if it represented something bad or wrong. I begin from that analysis, that is, opposition to same-sex marriage presupposes that same-sex relationships, homosexuality, being LGBT, is morally wrong or bad. And I want to question that assumption. I want to say this is not only an unjustified assumption, but in fact I would be arguing that it is in principle an unjustifiable assumption. So I'm going to be doing three things this evening. First of all, I will be arguing against that fundamental premise. That is, I will be arguing that LGBT is not wrong or bad according to any modern moral theory. There's no moral criteria by which we can determine that it's morally wrong or bad. We know why most people think it's morally wrong or bad, and that has to do with religion. So the second thing I'll be doing is explaining why appeals to religion are not justifiable in this connection, neither in morality nor in politics. And then lastly, I will be raising some of the usual claims that one encounters against same-sex marriage. And I will be providing some rebuttals to those claims, as well as in some cases what I take to be decisive refutations of those claims. So that's it. First I'll argue that it's not morally wrong. That's the premise that I think opposition to same-sex marriage is presupposing. We'll talk some about religion, and then I will consider some of these claims against it. Well, it seems to me that this is not such an intractable problem, actually. Unlike some other moral questions, I would say this is not such a quandary. It's not even really a dilemma. There are, unlike any number of substantive ethical issues, there are some clear moral answers here. Number one, same-sex marriage is not morally wrong, which means that in the absence of any good reason against it, it should be allowed, fully recognized. And number two, to prevent or to outlaw same-sex marriage is discrimination. I want to say straight-ahead discrimination. No pun intended. I might say, no other pun intended, out-and-out discrimination. That is, discrimination based not only on sexual orientation, but on sex. Discrimination based on sex. That is the core of my analysis. And that means that this is the moral wrong here. The moral wrong here is discrimination based on sex. This question, as I say, is not so intractable. It has all of the major modern moral theories on its side. That is, on the side of same-sex marriage. And in fact, some of the ancient moral theories as well. No secular moral theory can defend the proposition that being LGBT is morally wrong or bad. Therefore, no major ethical theory that does not depend upon religion would say same-sex marriage is morally wrong. In fact, all of them would say that it is permissible. Several of these theories would insist it is a positive good. which creates value. And near